I caught the Central Line train at Loughton, having driven in from Abbas Roding as I did every morning. There are a number of villages in that area of North Essex with the suffix Roding. They took their name from the River Roding, which rising in the East Anglian Heights flowed southward, meandering through the county, changing its name along the way to Barking Creek before adding its waters to the Thames. Roding was sometimes pronounced Ruthing, a name going back to Anglo-Saxon times when the river was known as Frodinga. Those first Englishmen pronounced the letter D as I. It's quite remarkable how we live every day in this island alongside reminders of more than 1,000 years of history. It was more convenient to get the train at Loughton, as the car park there had far more room than that at Ongar. The service from Ongar to Epping had in any case been suspended in 1994, possibly because few, like me, used the service. The train journey was simply a time to think, my subconscious ticking off the stations without my having to read the station signs. I had made this journey so many times that looking out of the window was no longer of interest. Same old, same old. The backs of terraced housing built after the line had extended out into Essex, a ribbon of humanity following the railway towards green fields, escaping from the grit and grime of London. Once busy goods yards had become crowded car parks at the stations along the line, as this was now commuter land. My ears recognized the clickety-clack as other lines that fanned out into the great suburbia joined the artery that fed me and thousands of others into the mall of commerce that was the city. The whine of the electric motors as the train accelerated, then a roar and pressure on the eardrums as the tube train descended into tunnels scarcely wider than the carriage itself, would tell me we had just left Leighton. A gradient took us back into the light at Stratford, followed by another descent into tunnel. None of these distracted my attention from the morning paper, yet they were filed in my subconscious sufficiently for me to know exactly where I was without looking out of the window. I did take notice on arrival at Mile End, where hundreds left the Central crossing the platform to the District line, and more hundreds crammed into the spaces they had left until there was standing room only. The next stop was Bethnal Green, where I would leave. So tightly packed was the carriage that I would start making my way to the doors as soon as the train left Mile End. I would push past bodies that were confined by yet other bodies in the close-packed carriage. The ensuing crush forced me to a closer intimacy with these strangers than they or I would wish. Breasts, hips, and bottoms were brushed and squeezed involuntary as I struggled through the throng, my briefcase catching in skirts and between legs, impeding my progress. At last I reached the doors, just as the train squealed to a halt. With a hiss, the leaves slid open, and I would push out, fighting against the surge of passengers boarding the train. Walking out of the station into fresh air was a pleasure. The London Underground, by virtue of being the oldest system of underground mass transit in the world, suffered from problems. The most immediate was the lack of air conditioning. But then those Victorian and Edwardian adventurers who built the system couldn't anticipate the advent of that particular convenience, or that so many people would travel on the system. It wasn't far to my office, which was in Old Street, and I enjoyed that short but brisk walk. A door to one side of a newsagent gave access to a steep flight of stairs. The Punjabi immigrant who owned the shop waved cheerily when he saw me, making a show of examining his wristwatch. That was his comment on my unvarying punctuality. Another door at the top of the stairs allowed entry to the lobby of my office suite. 2 rooms. The larger front room was the office with my desk and filing cabinets, and the other smaller room had become a kitchen with a toilet in the corner. Not exactly a plush suite, but it suited me as I had no staff. My briefcase was placed to the side of my desk. The paper went on top of the filing cabinet, and I went through to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and plugged it in, setting it to boil. Back at my desk, I checked the phone for messages, making notes on my pad of those that were important. I unlocked the filing cabinet and took out the dossier that I was working on. These were the accounts of one of my clients. I was a certified accountant, and this was my world. My name? Well, it doesn't matter really, as I went under a number of pseudonyms. At school, I was first called Jesse on account of my lack of height and body weight. I was only 5'6" and weighed about 6 stone. I am still 5'6", but my weight has increased now. Those who called me Jesse were bigger boys, bullies, all who picked on me with impunity. I learned a valuable lesson there apart from the official lessons. I learned that the world worked on trade-offs. The bullies who didn't bother too much about studying, they would slip into a life of crime anyway, still had to pass exams, and it would not do for them to be seen as the dunces of the class. I did apply myself to the lessons, and soon I was in a position where they needed my knowledge. So an uneasy truce was forged. I helped them by doing their homework for them, making crib notes for the exams, and they would pick on someone else at the same time, protecting me from other would-be bullies. Did I feel guilty that others were then the target of their bullying? No. I grew up in the East End of London, and that world had always had the strong and the meek with violence happening every day. Strength was not always muscle, and men learned early to use whatever talent they had to survive. People who were not Londoners would call me a Cockney, but they were wrong, as I hadn't been born within the sound of bow bells. My dad was a dock worker, waiting in line every morning at the dock gates with all the others to see if the foreman had work for him on that day. He was killed working in the hold of a ship when the net hoisting a load broke. The contents of the net, Brazil nuts, fell on him. Dock workers were always casual labor, so there was no insurance or compensation. After his death, Mum would work 3 cleaning jobs to clothe me and make sure that when I went to school I was properly turned out. My going to grammar school was an additional problem for her, as I then needed the sports kit for cricket in the summer and rugby in the winter. She managed, often going without so that I had what I needed. When I turned 23 and had passed my accountancy exams, she left. I suspect that she had a man friend all those years after Dad died and decided that having done her job, she could now have her own life. I could manage on my own. I never saw or heard from her again. In later years at school, the name Jessie was forgotten and I became just Jess, possibly an acceptance by the bullies that I was of more use to them on side than as the target of their cruel games. Those bullies had indeed taken up the life of crime and still call me Jess, as I now undertake to keep their accounts looking good for the inland revenue. They can't declare that the majority of their earnings come from the proceeds of crime. So I created businesses that could show profits for them to declare whilst leaving them with most of their income untaxed and untouchable. I do well out of the arrangement. My earnings are declared and taxed accordingly, although quite a tidy sum is tucked away in foreign accounts safe from our greedy politicians. As far as the tax man is concerned, I am an honest accountant and very successful. I also occupy a position which could best be described as criminally diplomatic. London and all other large cities tend to be parochial. The bosses each define an area that they call theirs and sanction or deny the plans of lesser thieves within their boundaries. The criminal fraternity, usually saddled with a volatile nature, are not good at talking to each other, so from time to time, I would get a request from Mr. Brown to discuss a problem with Mr. Green. I had been blessed with a calm and non-combative nature, so I could address the problem and find a solution. Gang wars are not good. They attract too much attention in the papers and from the police. Quiet diplomacy allows crime to flourish without attracting attention. Mr. Brown and Mr. Green are of course pseudonyms, as is mine of Mr. Smith when they refer to me. I, of course, know their real identities, as I said I went to school with many of them. Commissions received for these services form the basis of my untaxed safety net. Crime has changed over the last few years. Bank raids and attacks on armored vans are history. Now crime thrives on internet fraud, credit and debit card theft, and cloning. Most people walk around with thousands of pounds available to them in their purse or pocket in the shape of little plastic cards. My clients take advantage of that. It's almost a victimless crime, as the losers are the banks and the insurance companies. I do not kid myself. I am as much a felon as my clients simply by keeping their confidence. Under UK law, conspiracy is just as culpable as the actual crime. Our system worked smoothly. I was beginning to doubt that I could say the same about my marriage. I was starting to think that Lily, my wife, had something to hide. I had no positive evidence for this. No detail, no photographs, no mysterious calls, no unexplained absences. It was the lack of some details that brought about my suspicions. Accountants look at the detail that others ignore. Credit card bills come in, and most people either look casually at the balance and pay, or ignore them completely, allowing the direct debit they have set up deal with the account. I didn't. I examined closely every item and the interest charged. If you believe that credit card companies don't make mistakes, you are living in cloud cuckoo land. Over the last few months, Lily had added to her wardrobe a rather nice dress and a very elegant suit. Even I could tell they were not cheap. At first, I was pleased that she wanted to look good for me, and she did wear them at social events we attended together. In the main, she wore them to work. They were probably better quality than I would think suitable for work. It was curiosity that led me to see how much they cost. The detail that alerted me to a problem was that no charge appeared on her credit card statement. The bank statement, it was a joint account, did not show a charge either. Nor were there withdrawals of large cash sums to cover the cost. So to all intents and purposes, Lily had got these clothes free of charge. If there was one thing I had learned in my formative years, it was that you don't get anything for nothing in this world. So how did she come by these items? It may be that they were provided for her work. After all, receptionists needed to look good as the first impression of her employer. The other thought that bothered me was that someone, probably a man, had bought them for her. Was there a trade-off somewhere along the line? If a man were to buy a pretty lady some clothes, it was usually on the understanding that at some time he would be allowed to take them off the wearer and enjoy the pretty lady when she was unclothed. Was there another man in the picture? I could not say, except that this needed investigating. Some I could do myself. But for most of the investigation, I needed to find others who could help. I had met Lily when I called upon a client. She was a newly employed receptionist, and she was perfect for the job. Pretty, but not beautiful. She had a manner that made it a pleasure to talk to her. Her face was without guile and would reflect her mood, smiling easily with the person she spoke to, and with a talent for empathy that drew the other person to her. Lily was an Essex girl, an appellation that has become a joke in the UK, but she was far from typical. Yes, she did wear stiletto heels, but her shoe color would always match the color of her dress, and she rarely wore white. If she danced around her handbag in the middle of a club, it was only to protect it from the busy workers of someone like Frank. He mentioned once that most of the liberated credit cards that came to him were borrowed from people in nightclubs. I called upon my client frequently and got to know her quite well. She was not overly intelligent, I gathered from talking with her, and would be the first to admit it. However, she would listen and question, trying to fill in the gaps that existed in her education. She was an orphan and had been brought up in a children's home, which did explain the paucity of her schooling. She did, however, know how to present herself, always smartly dressed and with immaculate makeup. I was surprised when she let me know that asking her out would result in an acceptance. For our first date, I took her for a meal at a good restaurant. She was quite at ease with who she was and didn't try to act. Our conversation flowed easily, and we had an enjoyable evening. Other dates followed, to concerts, the theater, and dancing. Lily was conscious of our relative heights. She was the same height as me and would wear flat shoes on our dates, although she would wear high heels to work. I told her that it was no problem to me if she wanted to wear high heels. "Are you sure?" "It's not a problem," I replied. "I have been looking up at people for all my life, and looking up at you is the best yet." From that time on, Lily wore high heels and looked damn good in them. Her legs were a work of art. I asked her to marry me, and her tears trickled down her smiling face as she accepted. We honeymooned in Tenerife, where Lily, who despite her 25 years was relatively innocent, became very enthusiastic about our physical relationship. I was 5 years her senior, and I had been lucky enough to learn from a couple of experienced ladies. It was particularly satisfying for me when she expressed surprise at the size of my appendage. My height would lead many to assume that I was in proportion in every respect. In truth, I was no bigger than the slightly better side of average, but on my small frame it appeared to be large. Lily's enthusiasm continued even when we came back to the reality of the day-to-day grind. Accountancy is a dull and dry business, yet pays very well. I could afford to keep both of us, but Lily liked her job and wanted to keep it. We had been married for 3 years when she changed jobs to work with a company in Chelmsford. She was again the receptionist, but as she explained, it was easier to get to work in Chelmsford than Stratford. It was approximately a 15-mile commute to Chelmsford from Abbas Roding, which took her half an hour. The journey to Stratford would take at best an hour. All this appeared reasonable to me, and I replaced her old car with a good used Volkswagen Golf, so that she had a reliable car to make the journey. Lily didn't use her car except to get to work and back, and to shop at a supermarket close to her work. We used my car apart from that. It was bigger and more comfortable, and Lily preferred to be driven. The receipts for the services on her car were in my files and noted the exact mileage. I could easily work out her average weekly mileage and estimate the mileage her car should show now. So when I got the chance one weekend when Lily was in the bath, I checked the mileometer. My estimate allowed for some extra journeys in the last 7 weeks in service, but Lily had managed to clock up some 400 miles over and above my calculation. Not many miles, but when compared to the average worked out from the number of days between services, she was driving an average of 60 miles extra per week now. Where was she going in those 60 miles? It was time to get help. I knew where I could catch Frank at 11 o'clock in the morning. He would be at the Starlight. It's a cliche, I know, that criminal bosses would own a nightclub, but there was a point to it. With so many people coming and going, who actually got to speak to whom, and what they discussed was very difficult to say. However, at this time of day, I was just an accountant coming to talk to a client. Frank had just got in and was drinking his first cup of coffee. He poured one for me as soon as I came into his office. Problem with the accounts, Jess? Frank had started out as one of the bullies all those years ago. No, Frank. I shook my head. I have a problem. A personal problem. I know, but I'm not a plastic surgeon. He grinned. That was quick repartee for Frank. I smiled thinly before going on. I need someone who could follow my wife and tell me where she's going. Oh. His face became serious. You don't think she's... He left the sentence in midair. It's a possibility, I said. He sipped as his coffee slowly, then nodded. There is someone. He owes me a favor. Everyone owes Frank a favor. They may not think that they did, but Frank had ways of getting favors out of the most unlikely characters. I'll talk to him. Do you want to meet him here? I can get him here this afternoon. I thought about it then nodded. Yes, Frank. That will be good. He will be discreet. He will, if he knows what's good for him. He poured more coffee for both of us. Jess, if she is playing around, what will you do? Divorce her? I had thought about that. No. If she fights, her solicitor would start digging into my finances to get her maintenance increased. I don't want anybody looking into my affairs. It could turn up a lot of things that we would both prefer were kept quiet. He looked up with alarm. No, I see where you are going with that. So what will you do? I'll cut her adrift with a monthly payment to keep her quiet. I could arrange for a more permanent result. Thanks, Frank. But no thanks. A body has a habit of being found. We don't want plods treading all over our doorsteps. Besides, I couldn't do that to Lily. You love her then? Yes, I do. But if she's playing around, she goes. I couldn't live with her. Ever. That afternoon, I was back at the Starlight. The man was waiting nervously. A summons from Frank usually had that effect. Frank introduced us. Vin, this is Mr. Smith. He needs someone followed and a full report of her movements and who she meets. He paused for a moment to let that sink in, and then menacingly told Vin, Mr. Smith is a very good colleague of mine. I would be very upset if you tried any tricks. Got it? Vin nodded quickly, the nervous perspiration glistening on his brow. Yes, Mr. Weston. Who will I be following and where? Now that was a good question, and I answered. Vin had to know who it was, and that would reveal my identity. It's my wife. Her name is Lily Martin. I wrote down my address for him. I want her followed for at least 2 weeks to her work in Chelmsford and anywhere she goes from there. I want details of who she meets outside of her work and home. If you can get photos, so much the better. She usually leaves home at 8:15 and she drives a silver VW Golf. I took back the piece of paper and wrote down the registration number. He looked at the address. Where is this place, Abbas Roding? Great start, I thought. It's about 6 miles north of Chipping-Onger. His face cleared. He knew where Chipping-Onger was. Okay, Mr. Martin, I'll be there tomorrow. Then he put me in a more assured mood. Is this Abbas Roding a small place? If it is, I shall stick out like a sore thumb. That was a good point. Yes, you will. 1 car an hour is busy for Abbas. I thought for a moment. Tell you what, she uses country lanes at first, but she turns onto the A1060 just south of Margaret Roding. That's a busy road, so you will be able to follow her from there without being noticed. Leave it to me. Mr. Martin, where can I contact you? Phone me at my office. I gave him my card. He slipped my card into his wallet and stood. I'll call you in a few days just to give you a progress report. When Frank and I were alone, he ordered more coffee. I can't understand you, Jess. You are the most sordid guy I have ever known. Even now you are calm and thinking things through. Don't you ever get angry? Yes, Frank, I do. In fact, I am bloody angry now. But anger isn't the way to handle anything. You need to think things through before doing anything that could rebound on you. And you are going to wait. What will it be? 2 weeks? 3? Or more? Vin will want an earner out of this. Say a monkey a week plus car expenses. What if he comes up with nothing? Then I shall be relieved that she isn't playing around. But my gut instinct tells me she is. I went on as usual. I was well aware of how people saw me. A quiet, inoffensive little man, wearing a charcoal gray pinstripe suit, carrying a briefcase. In fact, I encourage the image. There are hundreds like me going to work every day. We work at our desks surrounded by paperwork, dry as dust, dependable and boring, and most importantly, unremarkable. I like to be unremarkable. Yet many of those men had a secret. For some, it was a small secret, like reading porn magazines in their lunch hour before going home to their loving wife who could never be as exciting as that girl on the page. For others, it was gambling or drinking, the need to place a bet on a sure thing, or the surreptitious glass in the local pub before taking the bus or train home. I had my secrets. The first was my connection with the criminal class. Not even Lily knew about that. The second was that I was having Lily, the woman I worshipped, followed. My dry, logical, mechanical brain had acknowledged the possible problem and had come up with the means to gather more knowledge. What if more knowledge meant the end of my marriage? My brain gave me the answer. My heart wouldn't listen. Lily had a special place in my life. Not just because she was good to look at. She had that ability to make my life fun. My work, as many could imagine, had no place for merriment. It was painstaking attention to detail and the rules of accountancy. When I got home, Lily lifted me out of that husk. She was full of joy divine, so much that she had enough for it to spill over onto me and make my home life a time of laughter, happiness, and pleasure. If she was cheating, that life would end and my heartbreak and pain would be inconsolable. Vin phoned me on the next Monday. I have something for you, Mr. Martin. I can tell you over the phone, or do you want to meet? I wanted to prepare myself for this, so asked him to meet me at the Starlight. Even if Frank wasn't there, the staff knew me well enough to allow me some privacy. I'll see you at the Starlight at 2:30. Vin apologized to me. I'm sorry, Mr. Martin, but I am certain that your wife is up to something. He referred to his notes. I followed her to work every day. Tuesday through to Thursday, she worked all day, only coming out to get a sandwich from the supermarket just down the road. Friday, she left at 11:30 in her car. She had a passenger. I followed her to Mark's Tay, where they went to a hotel for lunch. They came out at 2 and drove back to work. I went back to the hotel and asked some questions. They go usually once a week for lunch, just as I observed Friday. They have lunched regularly for about 5 weeks. I did learn that he had booked a room for one visit, and he spent a couple of hours in the room. But my informant could not say for certain that your wife was with him that day. But it seems likely. Vin had seemed loath to tell me that, and I was just as unhappy to hear it. Oh God, Lily, what have you done to us? I pulled myself together. How did you get this information? I had worked in a hotel once. You don't ask reception, you corner one of the porters. They know everything that happens and quite happy to talk once a few notes get offered. Would they know who books in? Yes. The porter's room has a computer logged onto the bookings page so that they know where to take the cases when a guest arrives. Who is the man she is lunching with? His name is Bennington, W.A. Bennington. I knew the name. He was the managing director of the company Lily worked for. I sat silently, trying to come to terms with this. Vin had proved nothing except my wife had lunch with her boss at least once a week. Inadvisable for her, but not actually infidelity. If she had told me, it would be acceptable, but she hadn't, thus making it a secret. She may or may not have spent 2 hours with him in a hotel room. You shouldn't accuse when you can't prove. I needed more. Vin, will you carry on with the observation? Yes, Mr. Martin. There is something. Bennington has booked a private dining room for next Friday. It will be him and 3 guests. I could get access to the room before, and a mate of mine could fix up some digital cameras. That is if you think it would help. I looked at him. Won't they be seen? He shook his head. No, Mr. Martin. They are so small he can put them into air conditioning vents and smoke alarms. Do they take photos or video? Video. He will need to be quite close, loading the images onto a computer. The signal doesn't travel that far, but he can get screen grabs anytime you want. How much will this cost? He thought for a moment, possibly wondering how much he could con out of me. 100 for the porter and say 500 for my mate. I nodded. Do it. I got my wallet from my inside pocket. Here's 2 thou. Let's call it wages for the week and expenses. That should cover your mate and the porter. I put the money down on the table. He didn't pick it up. Mr. Martin, I'll take the money for expenses, but you don't owe me anything for wages. This is a favor from Mr. Weston. I looked up in surprise. Vin, I know how Mr. Weston assumes that people will do him a favor. Your favor is benefiting me, and when someone does a good job for me, I believe that should be recognized. Take the money. I didn't have to tell him twice. The money was scooped up quickly. Thank you, Mr. Martin. We left the Starlight together. He turned left and I hailed a cab. The club was very near to Canary Wharf and black cabs abounded in the area now. Not so a few years ago when they would be as rare as hen's teeth. No one living in Docklands at that time could afford a cab fare. But the influx of so many financial service types with cash burning holes in their pockets had changed all that. The cab took me back to Old Street and my office. I sat at my desk and stared into nothing. Nothing is what my life promised to be from now on. In that future, like an automaton, I would take the train in the morning, my fellow passengers knowing nothing, nor caring of the bitter pain that I carried with me every day. I would come to this office and place figures in the right columns, and even then the pain would keep me reminded of what I had lost. Then in the evening, I would return to an empty home. No, not a home, a house, a dull, listless place empty of her laughter, her presence, her voice, even the lingering perfume she would leave in any room she entered. That would be my life. It didn't matter that my logical brain told me that I had no proof. My emotions told me otherwise. She had allowed another man to view, taste, and possess her, giving to him that which she had once promised only I would have. Lily. Oh, Lily. Why? Why? When I arrived home that evening, I was feeling sick. I had wondered how I could refrain from making love with Lily, as she would expect for the next few days. In making love, we revealed all of ourselves, hopes, dreams, and bare emotions. I could not act sufficiently well to fool her. She would know something was amiss. I didn't have to act ill. The closer I got to home, the more the knot in my stomach tightened, until I was actually ill, not faking. Lily was full of concern. Have you eaten something that has upset you? I shook my head. I don't think so. Well, I had a kebab at lunchtime. She looked at me in astonishment. A kebab? Oh, Chad, you of all people should know that reheated meat is certain to make you ill. What made you do that? Chad. Now there's another name. My given name is Charles, a name rarely used when I was younger. Lily didn't like the name. She said it reminded her of upper class, toffee-nosed twits. The Yanks would of course change Charles to Chuck, but in the UK Chuck was a slang word for vomiting, so that was out. From very early on in our relationship, she had called me Chad. I just fancied a kebab for lunch. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I tried to joke. It didn't work for either of us. Come on, let's get you to bed. If you're still bad in the morning, I'll get the doctor to call in. I would be still bad in the morning, and probably every morning for some time to come. It was a sickness I would learn to live with. The Lily that was so solicitous of my condition was at odds to the picture I had in my mind of a cheating, adulterous wife, an imbalance that I found difficult to equate. She fussed around me like a mother hen, keeping me supplied with liquids and making sure that the bowl was close at hand should I be sick. I did retch a time or two when she was there, her cool hand on my brow supporting my head as I heaved, the other hand stroking my back. Her loving actions added to the dichotomy rather than resolving it. I could put an end to this, but with what could I challenge her? That she had lunch with her boss? I could not be certain that she was one of the party next Friday. Perhaps I could pretend illness next Friday. Would she go, or would she stay home to minister to me? Possibly she would have stayed home, but that would only put off the inevitable if there was an inevitable. Fidelity cannot be demanded as a right. It is a gift, given freely and unconditionally from one partner to the other. I gave my fidelity to Lily, happily with the love I bore her foremost in my mind and heart. My sad thoughts were that she had already compromised her commitment, even if she had not given him her body, by seeing him socially without telling me. The mind becomes unfaithful before the body. The next few days were a blank. I know I went to work and presumably made the right decisions. If I hadn't, then some of my clients may be paying far more in tax than they expected. Into the vacuum, my treacherous mind sent pictures. Horrible pictures of Lily laying naked under another man, spreading her legs to offer him her vagina, happily accepting him into her body and screaming her delight as he pumped his essence into her eager womb. Those revolting scenes gave me an insight into the mind of men who had killed their errant wives. I put aside those thoughts as an image came to mind of Lily lifeless and cold laid on the bare earth, chilled me to the core. As much as I hated her for her deception, I loved her. How could those two emotions coexist? I didn't go to work at the normal time on that fateful Friday. I wanted to see what Lily would wear to work. She seemed uncomfortable with my being there long after my usual departure time. That alerted me. Do you still feel unwell, Chad? No, Lily, I'm fine. Why do you ask? Well, you are usually out of the house at 7:30. Oh, sorry, I didn't tell you that I wouldn't be going in at the normal time. I have an appointment in Layton at 10. It seemed silly to go into the office for 10 minutes, then come all the way back out again. Lily accepted the explanation. However, when she did come downstairs, she wore a belted Burberry. I looked askance at the coat. I think it might rain today, she explained. Was there guilt on her face? Possibly, I thought. She kissed me and left the house. I went upstairs and looked through her wardrobe. I am probably as unobservant as the next man. So Lily's selection of clothes was a mystery to me. I did notice dresses that I could not remember seeing before and wondered if her secret admirer had shown his appreciation again. Whatever, I did find the dress I had noticed when my suspicions were aroused, but not the suit. Therefore, I was fairly sure that she was wearing that today. I had seen her wearing that to work at least once before, so why hide the suit now? I thought that was the reason why she had worn the Burberry. I left the house shortly after and went to work. Close to 4:30 my phone rang. As usual, I didn't give my name when I answered, just saying hello, and then waited for the caller to ask for either Mr. Smith or Mr. Martin, thus telling me what sort of call this would be. Mr. Martin? Yes, speaking. It's Vin. Mr. Martin. My heart thumped wildly. Was this going to be good or bad? What have you got for me? I hated to say those words. I could hear the sympathy in his voice when he replied by saying, I'm sorry, Mr. Martin. The pain in my stomach returned twofold. I see. I was silent, knowing that my marriage was over. Mr. Martin? I'm here, Vin. Can you come to my office on Monday? Yes. What time? Make it about 11. I'll be there. That Saturday and Sunday was fraught with tension. Lily seemed to be in a most loving mood, yet I could not respond. If she was hurt by my lack of reaction to her offered ardor, she didn't show it, probably putting it down to the stomach bug of the previous week. We did all the usual things for the weekend. Some shopping on the Saturday, and later, I did some tidying up in the little plot that was our garden. The house was a traditional Essex weatherboard building that I had bought before our marriage. I took some time inspecting the weatherboarding. As usual, after the winter, there were places where some treatment and painting would be needed. I took my time over this little job. It kept me away from Lily's questioning eyes. With relief, I returned to work on Monday, even though I was apprehensive of what awaited me there. The buzzer sounded just before 11. Both the top door and the street door were released by electronic catches controlled from my desk. Vin announced himself, and I released the street door and listened to his steps up the stairs. As he neared the top, I pressed the other release, and he came into the lobby. I opened the door to my office. "Come in, Vin. Can I get you a cup of tea or coffee?" "No, thank you, Mr. Martin." I indicated a chair beside my desk, and he sat. My desk was dominated by a huge computer monitor. He looked at it and shook his head. "That is some piece of kit. You need it when you are doing spreadsheets with accounts." I told him. We were both skipping around, avoiding the purpose of his coming here. I took a breath and let it out slowly. "Okay, what have you got for me?" He had with him a small sports bag which he opened. He produced a stiff padded envelope and handed it over to me. Inside were numerous photos and a DVD in a case. "Mr. Martin, I would suggest that you don't watch the DVD. For a start, it goes on for 2.5 hours, and you will be very upset at what it shows. Mr. Bennington and your wife met 2 other gentlemen at the hotel. They all went upstairs to the private dining room, and the DVD shows them having lunch. The other gentlemen are a Mr. Haskins and a Mr. Wello. It would appear that they are in a position to award Mr. Bennington's company a very large contract. I have their car registration numbers if you wish to go further with this." After lunch, the staff cleared away the dishes and left them alone. Bennington seemed to lock the door and poured more drinks for them all. They chatted for a while, then after about 15 minutes, your wife climbed onto the table and began to strip. He stopped there, and I could see he was embarrassed. He picked up again. She got completely naked. He stopped again. "I'm sorry, Mr. Martin, but I don't want to tell you what happened. There are pictures, and you should look at them in private. Then you will know what went on." "I am so sorry." As he spoke, a ball of ice was starting to form in my chest. It got heavier and colder, growing in size until it seemed that I couldn't breathe properly and freezing my heart. There were few words that could describe how bereft I was. I had lost someone I loved, and I was there watching her being lowered into the ground. The difference was that the deceased would not come back and haunt you, reminding you of the pain. The sorrow was balanced by my anger. I was angry at Lily, but I fostered a bitter, unquenchable anger at Bennington and the 2 other men. Bennington knew she was married, yet he used her like a hooker, uncaring about her husband. I would deal with Lily first, and then with Bennington and the 2 others. I cleared my throat. "Vin, is it possible with those registration numbers to find out where they live, whether they are married or not?" "That could be done, Mr. Martin. There's always a copper or 2 who likes to earn a bit of cash." "How much do you think?" "Couple of hundred should do it." I nodded as he went on. "Mr. Martin, you are a decent guy. I'm not skimming you on this. I'll get the information, and you can settle with me when I've got it." We talked a little more before he left. However, the last thing he said to me was, "Don't do anything silly, Mr. Martin." I told him that I wouldn't. I skipped through the DVD. I had never been a fan of pornography, and certainly a film starring my wife would do little for me. I skipped over much of the play, especially the part when Lily stepped up to the table using a chair and flirtatiously removed her clothes. I just needed the salient parts and to hear the comments. That was quite interesting and fueled my anger against the 3 men. I couldn't watch when she allowed them total access to her body. I would have been physically sick. The sound came and went depending on where they stood. The men were talking after enjoying my wife. Lily had gone to a bathroom to clean up, I supposed. The one I identified as Wello said to Bennington, "Where did you get her?" He grinned at them. "Good, isn't she?" Bennington remarked loftily. Haskins agreed. "She makes my wife look like a bloody statue." He looked at Bennington. "Is there any chance of a repeat? I would be happy to pay for the room." "I would think so. Let me know when you want to come back." "She's married, isn't she?" Wello queried. Bennington grinned. "Yes. I believe her husband is a little runt. She says he's an accountant, but it's more likely he's just a bookkeeper. Probably has such a tiny dick that she's never felt it." They all laughed together. I stopped the DVD at that point. Well, I thought we shall see who laughs last. But first I had to confront Lily. I left the office shortly after Vin had gone. Lily would usually get home about 5:30, at least an hour before I got back from work. Normally, she would have started cooking, and that would be too domestic a situation for the conversation we were going to have. It was the middle of the afternoon when I opened the front door, Plenty of time for me to arrange things. I had left my car in the pub car park, somehow thinking that if Lily didn't know I was home, she would be surprised and it would unsettle her. Stupid thought, really. She couldn't deny anything. It was all on the DVD. I slotted the disc into the player and pressed pause at the point where they entered the room and sat down. The photos, Vin called them screen grabs, I sorted. I wouldn't need all of them. I picked out the one where Lily was standing on the table naked, then another which showed Bennington holding her legs wide as he pushed into her, then the last photo, which was of her lying face down on top of Haskins with his tool locked into her. Welling was standing to one side and Lily had turned her head, taking his in her mouth, whilst Bennington from his position could have been sodomizing her. I put them in a spare folder I had brought home with me. There would be no need for any more, although Vin's friend had provided plenty. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down to wait. Lily came in at 5:25. She went straight to the kitchen to put the kettle on, and then came into the back room we called the lounge and stopped short as she saw me. "Chad, you startled me. You're home early. Has something happened? Are you not feeling well?" I raised my hand. "Something has happened, and no, I am not feeling well." "In that case, darling, I am going to call the doctor. This had been going on for too long." "Yes, it has, but the doctor won't be able to cure this. Sit down, Lily." She looked at me curiously and sat in the armchair. I flicked the play button on the remote and the screen lightened, and suddenly they were there. I heard a gasp. I let the DVD play for a while. I could hear Lily hyperventilating. I turned to her. "Interesting, this DVD." She was trying to catch her breath, moaning, "No, for God's sake, no." Her hands came up and covered her face, and I heard wretched sobbing coming from between her cupped hands. I stopped the DVD and waited for her to recover. It took a while, as every time her crying lessened, she would lift her face toward me, and seeing the stony expression on my face, the tears and sobs would start again. Eventually, she could cry no more. She couldn't look me in the eye. Her face was blotched and red with tears drying on her cheeks. "How?" She cleared her throat and tried again. "How, Dee?" I interrupted her. "It doesn't matter how, it only that matters that I know. That DVD is 2.5 hours long, so you understand what it shows. All of it." I shouted. "Everything." She burst into tears again. To give her time to recover, I went and made 2 coffees. I thought that caffeine was needed for this conversation. I carried them into the lounge and brought a warm, damp flannel for Lily to wipe her face. She smiled weakly to signify her thanks. She took a sip of coffee. "I am so sorry, Chad." I nodded. "Of course you are. Would you be sorry, though, if I had not found out?" She didn't reply to that question. I didn't expect a response. "What are you going to do now, Chad?" "I am not doing anything. You are." "What do you mean?" "You are going upstairs and packing your bags. Tomorrow you leave this house, and you will never come back." "Oh, Chad, do I have to? I love you so much." I flicked open the folder and selected the photo where she was accommodating all 3 men. I put it in front of her. "Is this how you love me so much?" I shouted. A fresh bout of sobbing ensued. I left her alone for a while. I needed to get myself under control as well. The anger was burning inside of me, but I couldn't give it free rein. I was sure that I would do her harm if that happened. When I returned, she had regained composure. "Are you going to divorce me?" she asked fearfully. "No, Lily, I am not." She looked up, a spark of hope in her eyes that were dashed when I continued. "If you decide that you like the sort of life that Bennington gives you, then you will have to divorce me. I'll use those pictures to defend the action, and the likely outcome is that you get nothing. It will probably mean that Bennington will be divorced as well. I would imagine that his wife will leave him destitute, so I doubt that you will have a good life with him unless he pimps you out. You seem to be good at that." Lily blanched as I compared her to a prostitute, but didn't argue. I knew that the DVD and photos would not be admissible in court as they were obtained illegally. Lily didn't know that. I wouldn't be with him. I don't really like him that much. The question in my mind was, if that were the case, why give him her body? I didn't ask. It would invite her to explain, and I couldn't face the humiliation of having her tell me that I was insufficient for her. "Why are you not going to divorce me?" "There is little point. I am not going to get married again. You seem to have put me off the wedded state. A divorce would cost me. I have worked too hard to put all this in jeopardy. You go. If you have any pride in yourself, you will find another job and try to put what you have done behind you. However, I will make you an allowance. You need to open your own bank account, as from tomorrow your cards will not work. I will put some money into your account every month. Oh, and you can keep the car." Lily was bemused. "Why would you do that?" "Lily, I have loved you, and even now I still love you. But what you have done has hurt me so much. You were concerned that I was ill lately. It wasn't a stomach bug. It was learning what you had been up to that caused that. I cannot live with you anymore. Every time I saw you, it would remind me of what you have done, and you would suffer my anger. I gave you my heart when we married, and I can't take it back. Even so, my love for you will not let me see you in hardship. Besides, all the years of sex that you gave me, consider the account settled. Darling, we can work together and find a way of overcoming this. Lily tried again. Oh yes, I replied sarcastically. It's not we who have to overcome this, Lily. It's me. I watched you with those men, and it made me physically sick. My wife, the woman I love, allowing other men into her body and looking happy about it. Those bloody pictures are burnt onto my memory. The only way that will allow me to overcome this is total amnesia. Lily moped around upstairs, slowly packing clothes. Every time I had to go upstairs, she looked at me plaintively, asking with her eyes if I would change my mind. I couldn't. The pictures in my mind taunted me, hardening my heart. She phoned someone called Daphne during the evening, and I suspected arranged somewhere to stay for a while. I heard her coming down the stairs accompanied by heavy thumps, which I imagined was caused by the well-filled suitcase being too heavy for her. A week ago, I would have rushed to help. This evening, I wouldn't, nor ever again. She came into the lounge. I am leaving now. One of my friends at work is letting me squat with her for a few days. I shall quit my job without notice tomorrow. She waited in hope possibly that I would tell her to stay. I dashed those hopes. It's a pity you didn't put your notice in a few months ago, I said angrily. Chad, I am so sorry, so very sorry. Please remember I do love you. I made no reply. She opened the front door, and I heard her sobbing again as she dragged the suitcase out. The door slammed shut. I spent the rest of the evening in total misery, going to bed much later than usually. The bed linen retained her fragrance, and my tears could not be stopped. If there was any comfort in this, it was that Lily didn't say that stupid thing it meant nothing. It was only sex, or it's not what you think. How could any cheater come out with lines like that? When the evidence was there on the TV screen, I knew I had done the right thing. But Christ, it hurt. Lily's had hurt me and I had hurt me. When would it stop? Routine and attention to detail had been the stuff of my life. Yet in the space of a week, I had been late to the office twice. My Punjabi newsagent was so unnerved by this that he had to come out and question me when I arrived at my office the next day. Mr. Martin, Sahib, it is so very unusual for yourself to be late. Now I am noticing that twice in the last week this has happened. I am feeling that my timepiece is not working properly. Mr. Chandali, your watch is perfectly in order. I have had appointments close to my home which I concluded first. Do not worry, the world hasn't changed that much. I am very pleased to hear that, Mr. Martin. Now I see you haven't got your newspaper this morning. Please allow me. He rushed into his shop and returned immediately with a copy of my usual Financial Times. He presented it to me as if it was a priceless gift. I reached into my pocket for the money. No, Mr. Martin. No money, please. It is my pleasure. I trudged up the stairs with my faith in human nature restored just a little. Later that day, Vin phoned me. I just wanted to know, Mr. Martin, if you were all right. Thanks, Vin. My self-esteem is bruised badly, but I shall survive. And Mrs. Martin? Gone. I'm sorry about that, but I suppose you had no choice. I agreed with him. He went on. I shall have the details for those two men shortly. My friendly copper says that if the cars are registered to a company, would you like him to take it further? What does he mean? Oh, it's simple. He phones the company sort of officially, and as he is a copper, they will tell him who those cars are allocated to and their home addresses. Vin, you know some very disreputable coppers. He laughed. Only one or two, Mr. Martin. Just one or two. With no reason to go home at the usual time, I decided to work on. No doubt alarming Mr. Chandali again. This was not work for my clients. This was research for me. It can be surprising to many people how much information could be obtained about a business concern. I was going to research Mr. Bennington and the company for which he was managing director, Elwin Dax and Company. I had two computers in my office. The main one on which I worked my magic with accounts had never been connected to the internet. The wireless receiver had even been removed. I knew enough from Frank and the others how easy it was to hack into a computer. I had a second machine to access the internet. The company's house website gave me a lot of information, including the last year's accounts. These are abbreviated accounts, but quite useful if you knew how to read them. After a general overview, I looked at the contingency fund. Any well-run company would have such a fund. It was in essence the company's private piggy bank. In good years, you would place a surplus in the contingency. As this reduced net profit and was not declared for dividends, it wouldn't come into the tax calculation. In bad years, you would use the contingency to cover the lower or non-existent profit and still allow the company to declare a dividend. The other reason for it was the sudden and unforeseen need for quick capital. Many accountants would tell you that the contingency fund was an indicator of the company's health. Although Elwin Dax and Company had declared a modest profit year-on-year, the contingency fund was negligible. Interesting, I thought. Either the contingency had been used to bolster profits and was now almost empty, or it had never been healthy at all. I then pulled up the Dun & Bradstreet site. You have to be registered to enter, and accountants are always registered with D&B. They word their reports very carefully, pointing out that their summary is based on available data and should not be taken as evidence as to the financial health of the company. Accountants can read between the lines, and their report on Elwin Dax and Company was not encouraging. Further investigation was required, but for that, I would have to go to Company's house. What I was looking for was not available on the internet. I went straight to Company's house the next day, returning to my office late morning. For the first time in the last few weeks, I was happy. I had determined to bring Bennington down, and I was delighted that he was helping me in that endeavor. I suppose you could say that once a shit, always a shit, and Bennington was indeed a shit. I had got some interesting facts, and although they didn't show false accounting, they indicated that perhaps that was happening. I left a message for Vin. I had another job for him. He called that afternoon. "Is there something I could help you with, Mr. Martin?" "Yes." "Vin, would you go up to Chelmsford and watch the company where my wife worked?" "What am I looking for?" "I want you to note down the registration numbers of their goods vehicles. I doubt that you can get them all, as they have about 25, and they go all over the country. But if you could get a good proportion of them, that should suffice." "Yes, I can do that. 2 or 3 days should do it." That's what I thought. "Do you want to find out who they are registered to?" I was impressed. Vin wasn't stupid. "You're ahead of me." "Yes, I do." "Leave it with me, Mr. Martin. I'll get back to you in 3 or 4 days." My suspicions had been alerted by the depreciation of the fleet. The claims were in line with the guidelines issued by HM Customs and Revenue, but there was no mention of capital expenditure on those vehicles in the capital account. Then there was posted an almost similar amount for servicing every year. Now these trucks cost a lot of money, and as they age, their servicing costs go up. The indication was that no new trucks had been purchased, and they had an aging fleet. But the servicing costs remained unaltered. I smelt a rat, and that rat's name was Bennington. My days returned to normal, relatively speaking. Back in Abyss Roading, my nights were my personal slough of despond.